What would you do if the person you loved blindsided you in front of your coworkers, only to realize they'd forgotten the one thing that could destroy their entire plan? She thought handing me divorce papers at work would humiliate me, but she had no idea what was written in the prenup she signed years ago. I still remember the exact time, 11:37 a.m. on a Wednesday. I was in the middle of a quarterly performance review meeting with my team, halfway through presenting our department's progress, when the receptionist knocked on the glass door. She motioned to me, holding a large envelope. Confused, I excused myself and stepped out. "Delivery for you," she said, handing it over like it was a birthday card. I opened the envelope right there in the hallway and felt my stomach drop. Inside were divorce papers, neatly stacked, signed, dated, served with the kind of precision that made it clear this wasn't an emotional outburst. This was premeditated, cold, and public. The worst part wasn't the shock. It was the fact that I could hear the meeting room's silence through the glass, the uncomfortable eyes following me as I stood frozen in place, holding my broken marriage in a manila envelope. She wanted humiliation. That much was obvious. She could have served me at home. She could have called, written, even sent a text if decency still lived somewhere inside her. But no, she waited for the moment where I looked my most respected, my most secure, and tried to cut me down from there. But what she didn't know, what she had completely forgotten, was that her little bombshell had a fuse wired into her own past, a fuse called a prenup. The moment I walked back into that conference room, the dynamic had shifted. I wasn't just the manager anymore. I was the man whose wife had just torpedoed his life in front of everyone. My voice cracked once when I tried to continue the meeting, but I pushed through it. Later, people came by offering sympathy in quiet, awkward murmurs, but a few looked at me differently, like I had been exposed, as if a failed marriage somehow made me less capable of leading a team. That was exactly the effect she had wanted, and for a few hours, I'll admit it worked. The shame was suffocating. But then I remembered something, a memory so sharp and clear, it sliced through my humiliation like a knife. It was from years ago, long before the cracks in our marriage. I was sitting across from her at our kitchen table, documents spread between us. She was twirling a pen and laughing, calling the prenup silly and unnecessary. Back then I thought so too, but I'd just gotten promoted, and my lawyer strongly recommended it. So we signed it, both of us, no coercion, no confusion. It was fair, not ruthless. She got what she needed if things ever went south, but she never bothered to read the whole thing. That day, I remembered something else, a specific clause buried deep inside it, a clause that she had agreed to, a clause that would make her regret every smug step she took into that divorce attorney's office. If you had asked me a month before that day, I would have told you my marriage was solid. Not perfect, but stable. We had routines, shared goals, or so I thought, and a decent social life. We weren't fighting, at least not openly. We took trips, laughed at Netflix shows, talked about saving for a second home. She even packed my lunch a few times that month, left notes with little hearts drawn on them. That's why the delivery hit so hard. There were no warning signs, no cold shoulder, no dramatic arguments leading up to it, just quiet cooperation and betrayal waiting in the wings. Looking back now, I realized the signs weren't absent, they were just subtle. She wasn't affectionate unless someone else was watching. Her phone always faced down. She made excuses to skip dinners with my colleagues. And worst of all, there was a shift in how she looked at me. Not with admiration or partnership, but calculation. I'd mistaken silence for peace, when in reality it was distance. And I think she mistook my trust for weakness. That's where she made her first real mistake. Because while I may have been a little blind to what she was planning, I wasn't stupid. I had protected myself without even realizing how much it would matter. The morning she served me, she kissed me on the cheek before I left for work. That detail still haunts me. She handed me a travel mug of coffee, my usual, and said she hoped my presentation went well. She even smoothed my tie, like a loving wife sending her husband off for battle. There was a smile on her face that didn't match the rest of her body language. Her eyes weren't kind. They were smug, and I, idiotically, thought she was just in a good mood. It wasn't until I got the papers later that I realized the truth. That smile wasn't love. It was victory, or what she believed was victory. She had coordinated it like a performance. She probably told her friends about the plan, how she'd serve me at work, how dramatic it would be. I could see her imagining the look on my face, the collapse of my public image. She wanted to break me, and she thought timing was everything. What she didn't anticipate was how much I had been protecting, how much I'd quietly built that she had no claim to. Her confidence that morning wasn't rooted in truth. It was rooted in ignorance, and it would become her downfall. We met in college. She was loud, funny, and full of energy, the kind of person who walked into a room and made everyone notice. I was quieter, more focused on internships and student debt than parties. But she drew me in. At first, I thought we balanced each other. Her spontaneity softened my rigidity, and I gave her a sense of direction. We talked for hours in library corners, stole kisses between classes, and made big plans for the future. I thought we were building a life. I thought she saw me for who I really was. Those early years felt real. When we struggled financially, we leaned on each other. When I was working 2 jobs, she'd make us pasta and light candles, joking that we were faking rich. It felt like partnership, but in hindsight, it was only real as long as things were hard. As I started to climb the ladder, get promoted, earn bonuses, manage teams, something in her shifted. The jokes turned into jabs. The we started turning into you. And that's when I started to wonder, had she fallen in love with me, or just with the version of me that hadn't yet made it? The transition was gradual, almost imperceptible. She started hanging out more with her high society friends, women who lived on their husband's dime and judged each other by handbags and kitchen renovations. She wanted things, luxury handbags, spa days, upscale brunches. I could afford it, but I began to feel like a credit card with a heartbeat. Conversations turned transactional. She asked more and gave less. I convinced myself it was just a phase, that she'd find balance again. But deep down, I felt the weight of something slipping away. We stopped talking the way we used to. She'd scroll on her phone during dinner. I worked later and later just to avoid the tension at home. The intimacy evaporated, but she didn't complain about that. As long as the money came in, as long as the vacations continued and the bills were paid, she was content to pretend. She thought I didn't notice the change. She thought I wouldn't do anything about it. That's when I started reviewing old files, digging up our prenup, refreshing my memory on the fine print. It wasn't paranoia. It was preparation. I built everything from the ground up. My first job out of college paid just enough to cover rent and ramen noodles. I climbed my way up with sleepless nights, 80-hour weeks, and every yes to tasks no one else wanted. When I finally started earning real money, I made sure to invest smartly. Real estate, stocks, side ventures. She was there, but she wasn't building it with me. She didn't contribute financially, not even part-time, and I never pushed her to. I believed marriage was about mutual support, not monetary equality. But in hindsight, she never saw the difference between ours and mine. She didn't care where the money came from, only that it came. She called herself a homemaker. But we never had kids, and I had to hire a cleaner when the dishes started piling up for weeks. Her version of homemaking was lounging with wine and shopping online. And yet, when she served those divorce papers, She listed half of everything as hers. Half the investments, half the retirement, half the properties. She thought marriage meant equal payout, no matter the effort. That's when I realized she wasn't leaving me because she fell out of love. She was cashing out. The shift in her mindset didn't happen in a vacuum. It came with new friends, women who spoke in fake sympathy and backhanded compliments. They hosted wine nights that turned into gossip sessions. They bragged about trading up, encouraged prenup loopholes, and whispered stories of ex-wives who'd cleaned their husbands out in court. I heard bits of these conversations when I'd come home early, catching snippets through closed doors. Once I even heard her say, "He thinks I'm just here for him. Wait until he finds out." I pretended I didn't hear it, but I filed it away. They planted ideas, not about healing or counseling, but about exit strategies. One of them had a lawyer husband and promised to get her the best. They cheered her on like she was entering a battle, not destroying her marriage. I wasn't just fighting her. I was fighting the ego boost they gave her, the fantasy they built around divorce like it was some prize to be won. They didn't know I had my own lawyer, and they definitely didn't know I had something stronger than advice. I had leverage, and she'd signed it long ago, with a smile on her face and not a care in the world. The irony still stings. When we first brought up the idea of a prenup, she laughed. Not just a soft chuckle, but a full-blown, eye-rolling laugh. "You're not that rich yet," she joked, waving her hand dismissively, like I'd just offered her a tinfoil crown. She thought it was a formality, a box to check so my lawyer would be satisfied. I remember her twirling her pen, pretending to sign the papers with exaggerated flair, mocking the entire process. "Fine, if this makes you feel better," she said, and that was that. She signed it without protest, assuming it would never matter. She never asked what was in it. Not really. She skimmed a few paragraphs, skipped the legal jargon, and trusted that I'd never use it against her. And maybe she was right about that, at the time. Back then, I loved her enough to ignore the power it gave me. But love doesn't survive betrayal. And when I held that thick envelope of divorce papers in my hand years later, I felt a strange sense of calm. Because unlike her, I knew exactly what was in the agreement she had once treated like a joke. She thought she was ending our marriage with a mic drop, but the real punchline was buried in the fine print. There was a moment months before the divorce when I considered tearing up the prenup. We were on vacation in the mountains, sitting by the fire, wrapped in blankets, sipping hot chocolate. It felt like one of those rare, genuine moments. She leaned her head on my shoulder and said she was glad we never had to worry about money, that she felt safe with me. I went to our room later that night, pulled the folder from the safe, and stared at it for nearly an hour. I thought that if we were truly partners, maybe we didn't need it anymore. I even laid it on the desk, imagining myself ripping it down the center. But I didn't. Something stopped me. Maybe instinct, maybe doubt. Maybe I sensed something was off even then, hidden behind the warmth of that moment. That choice haunted me at first. I felt guilty for keeping it, for not proving my trust. But that guilt vanished the moment she weaponized the divorce to humiliate me. That night, when I revisited the prenup after getting served, I didn't see a symbol of distrust. I saw protection. I saw a lifeline I'd nearly thrown away. And I saw a ticking clock counting down to the moment she'd realize just how badly she'd miscalculated. The same day I got served, I called my lawyer. Not just any lawyer. The same man who'd drawn up the prenup years ago. His voice didn't even flinch when I told him what had happened. "She finally pulled the trigger?" he asked, almost bored. We scheduled a meeting that afternoon. By 3 p.m., I was sitting across from him in his office, sliding the divorce papers across the desk. He looked them over and nodded. "Typical demands," he muttered. "But none of this matters. Not with what she signed." He pulled out a copy of the prenup, already bookmarked, already highlighted. Within the hour, we had a game plan. My assets were protected. My properties were insulated. The investments, locked behind legal language she'd never bothered to understand. She had asked for alimony, half my retirement, half the house, even my car. My lawyer smiled when he saw the list. "She's about to get a reality check," he said. I didn't feel angry in that moment. I felt something colder focus. I wasn't out for revenge. I just wanted her to understand that betrayal has consequences. And I was finally ready to let the paperwork speak for itself. In the aftermath of the public embarrassment at work, I had to explain the situation to my boss. It wasn't a conversation I looked forward to. But he called me into his office that afternoon with a serious look on his face and closed the door behind me. I expected a reprimand, maybe even a discussion about image and company perception. Instead, he said, "That was cold. You okay?" I nodded, but before I could speak, he reached into his drawer and pulled out the envelope. "You left this in the hallway. I didn't read all of it, just the first page. But you should probably take it home." I took it from him, embarrassed, but he surprised me again. "I've been through a divorce," he said quietly. "And let me tell you something. Don't let your emotions write your checks. Let your lawyer do that." I left the office that day with a strange sense of validation. The boss who had always expected perfection, who rarely showed emotion, had just given me the most human advice I'd heard in years. He didn't see me as a failure. He saw me as a man who'd been wronged, and who had every right to fight smart instead of loud. And I intended to do exactly that. When I received her official list of demands through her attorney, I had to read it 3 times to believe it. She wanted the main house, the lake cabin, and one of my rental properties. She wanted a luxury SUV that I'd bought under my business. She requested $5,000 a month in alimony, even though she'd never contributed a cent to our income. She wanted half of my retirement fund, full access to my stock portfolio, and, unbelievably, she listed my dog under disputed property. My dog, the one I'd had before I even met her. It wasn't just insulting, it was delusional. She thought the court would rubber stamp her greed. But that's the danger of living in a bubble of ego and bad advice. She'd been so sure of her position that she didn't bother checking whether the ground she was standing on was solid. Her lawyer, clearly not the brightest, must have taken her word for everything, because he filed the demands with confidence. I smiled reading them, not because I was amused, but because I knew what was coming. That prenup wasn't just airtight, it was nuclear. And her entire fantasy of walking away with half my life was about to go up in smoke. The speed at which she tried to dismantle our life was staggering. Within 48 hours of serving me, she had already emptied our joint account, canceled the housekeeper without telling me, and changed the locks on the lake house. It was like she had a playbook prepared months in advance, waiting for the exact moment to strike. She wanted to create chaos, to corner me legally, financially, emotionally. She assumed I'd be scrambling, reacting, desperate to negotiate. What she didn't realize was that the more aggressively she moved, the more reckless she became. And reckless people overlook the most important details. She was so caught up in her illusion of control that she didn't stop to consider what the prenup actually said about joint assets. That lake house, purchased under holding company in my name. The joint account, legally capped in liability thanks to the trust fund clauses she'd never reviewed. Even the SUV, technically a leased business vehicle, was untouchable under her claim. She thought by moving fast she'd catch me off guard, but all she did was expose her own lack of understanding. While she was busy changing locks, I was busy freezing accounts, initiating counterfilings, and lining up every document I'd ever need. She came to play a game. I came to win it. I didn't retaliate publicly. I didn't send angry messages. air grievances on social media, or stoop to petty games. That's what she expected: rage, emotional implosions, and desperate apologies. But what I did instead was far more devastating to her plans. I kept everything professional. My lawyer filed motions quietly but swiftly. Every financial asset we had, bank accounts, investment returns, property deeds, was reviewed and repositioned under the legal protections she had signed away. I looped in accountants, froze credit lines, and revoked any access she had to shared cards. In less than a week, her financial foundation collapsed beneath her. She didn't understand what was happening at first. The text messages started coming in, confused, then angry. Why can't I access the account? Why is the card declining? Did you block me from the rental app? I said nothing, because in war, silence is strategy. Her attorney finally called mine, asking for explanations. My lawyer responded with 4 words: refer to the prenup. That's when the panic really started. The speed of her attack had left her exposed. And while she was still figuring out how to regroup, I was already 3 moves ahead. Cold planning beats loud theatrics every time. Buried in page 11 of the prenup, under a section she had never bothered to read, was a clause regarding marital misconduct. Specifically, any attempt to manipulate financial accounts, conceal income, or take unilateral action to dissolve shared holdings before the formal divorce process would result in automatic forfeiture of claims to discretionary assets. She had violated every word of it. Her attempt to empty the joint account, cut me off from shared property, and seize control of the lake house weren't just aggressive, they were a breach of contract. When my lawyer showed me the clause again, I nearly laughed. It was like a trap she set off with her own hands. And because the prenup had been signed without coercion, notarized, and witnessed, it held up like steel. She had unknowingly invalidated half of her demands with her own behavior. That clause, which she once considered stupid legal fluff, was now the cornerstone of my defense and the tombstone of her case. She had no idea how deeply she'd buried herself until the court date approached and her lawyer started begging to renegotiate. But by then, it was too late. The day she realized she couldn't touch my money was the day her fantasy crumbled. She tried to buy furniture for a new apartment and was declined. She tried to withdraw from the emergency account we'd once set up and saw a balance of $0. She called me, screaming, accusing me of sabotaging her independence. I didn't answer. My lawyer had warned me, do not engage. Let her stew in the results of her own actions. Her social media went quiet. No more champagne brunches or hotel selfies. The soft life she curated online vanished overnight. Behind the scenes, her credit rating was plummeting. She had tried to open new cards and rent a luxury condo, but with no steady income and her name removed from anything I controlled, she was stuck. She moved into her friend's spare bedroom, one of the same friends who had cheered her on when she launched the scheme. That friend called it temporary. I knew better. I wasn't being cruel. I was enforcing the agreement we both signed. She thought she could rob me and walk away rich. Instead, she lost access to the very life she thought she was entitled to. Court day came like a storm cloud she never saw coming. She walked in with the same confidence she'd had the day she served me, dressed to impress, all smug glances and designer heels. She thought she'd win with drama, but her performance fell apart the second my lawyer opened with the prenup clause violations. Her face shifted. She started whispering to her attorney, then raising objections, then outright yelling. He's lying. This isn't fair. The judge, calm and unimpressed, asked her to sit down. Mrs. Langford, he said firmly, you signed these terms, and your actions triggered the consequences. Please be quiet. The shouting didn't stop. She accused me of manipulation, of being heartless, of hiding money. But the documents were clear, the timeline indisputable. She had acted first. She had broken the rules. Her lawyer tried to pivot, saying the agreement was outdated, that she hadn't understood it at the time. The judge shook his head. You're asking the court to pretend this document doesn't exist. That's not how this works. That was the moment she broke down completely, tears, sobbing, slumped in her seat. The courtroom was dead silent, and for the first time since this all began, I felt something close to closure. The courtroom was tense as the judge delivered his final remarks. He reviewed the evidence methodically, financial records, communications, and most importantly, the prenuptial agreement. Then he looked directly at her. "Mrs. Langford," he said, voice calm but resolute, "this court honors legally binding contracts. You entered into this agreement willingly, with legal counsel available to you. Furthermore, your actions in the days preceding this divorce filing show a conscious effort to undermine that agreement." She shifted in her chair, tears streaking her makeup, but the judge continued without sympathy. "This isn't about feelings. It's about the law, and the law is clear." Then came the final blow. Her requests for alimony were denied. She was awarded none of the properties, no share of my retirement or investments, and was instructed to return any funds she'd removed from the joint account beyond her allowed share, plus legal fees. The court even issued a formal note of censure for her attempts to manipulate asset control. I didn't gloat. I didn't smirk. I simply sat still and let the judgment fall like a stone into a still lake. That moment wasn't about revenge. It was about truth. She tried to twist the system, but held firm. There's a very specific moment, one I'll never forget, when she finally realized everything was lost. It wasn't during the shouting or the objections. It wasn't even when the judge denied her every request. It was right after he said, "You're entitled to only what the agreement permits." Her eyes stopped darting. Her breathing slowed. She looked around the room like she didn't recognize where she was. For someone who had staged her big exit like a movie scene, that moment was the cold, unfiltered reality she never expected. She wasn't the star. She was the one who walked into her own trap. It wasn't rage anymore. It was disbelief. She glanced at me as if hoping I'd call it all off, step in, and throw her a lifeline. But I didn't. I couldn't. That moment was the culmination of months, years, of betrayal and selfishness, and the weight of her choices finally crushed through her delusion. That face, the stunned silence, the slack jaw, the moisture pooling in her eyes, is burned into my memory. It wasn't satisfaction I felt watching it. It was something deeper, something final, a chapter closing with the softest, most undeniable thud reality. When I stepped out of the courthouse, I wasn't smiling. I wasn't triumphant. I was simply free. The air felt different, lighter, colder, but cleaner somehow. The press of responsibility I'd carried for a marriage that had long since died lifted from my shoulders. Everything she tried to take was still mine, because I protected it, because I moved smart, because I refused to react emotionally when it mattered most. I walked out with my assets, my dignity, and my future intact. She, on the other hand, walked out with nothing but a tarnished name and a rude awakening. People often ask me why I fought so hard, why I didn't just settle. The answer is simple. It wasn't about revenge. It was about fairness. I kept my promises, honored the vows, and worked for everything I had. I wasn't going to let someone tear it apart just because they grew bored or greedy. She tried to turn my life into a spectacle. Instead, she became the cautionary tale. And me, I left not just with what I built, but with peace. That's something no court can assign or deny. The first night I slept alone in my house post-divorce, I expected to feel hollow. I expected to lie awake thinking about what went wrong, about what I could have done differently. But I didn't. I slept like a man who had just put down a burden he'd carried far too long. In the morning, I made my own breakfast, sipped my coffee, and watched the sun rise over the yard she once wanted to claim. And in that quiet, I realized what freedom really meant. Not just being single again, but being untethered from manipulation, lies, and false loyalty. I started rebuilding, not my finances, which were fine, but my life, my sense of self, my trust in my own instincts. I traveled, reconnected with old friends, spent more time on hobbies I had abandoned during the marriage, and slowly the bruises faded. Not just the financial ones, but the emotional ones, too. She thought she was ending my story, but all she did was remove the wrong character from it. And in her place, peace, silence, strength, and freedom. The kind that doesn't come with a cost, but with clarity. So, what would you do if your spouse blindsided you at work, only to realize they'd played themselves in the end? Do you think prenups are fair? And have you ever seen someone try to rewrite history after getting exposed? If this story hit you hard, make sure to subscribe for more powerful, real-life twists, where karma always finds a way back.